The diploma fell from my trembling hands onto the hardwood floor of my empty living room, landing face down like a discarded promise. 65 years of life, and I had never felt more invisible than I did 3 hours ago, watching my daughter Katerina receive her PhD in environmental engineering, while every person in that auditorium embraced her, except me. I picked up the certificate she'd left behind in her rush to celebrate with everyone else. Dr. Katerina Bozic. My daughter. The daughter I'd mortgaged my house for, sold my vintage Camaro for, worked 3 jobs for. The daughter who hadn't even looked in my direction when they called her name. The silence in my house was deafening. Not the comfortable silence of solitude, but the suffocating quiet of abandonment. Outside, Detroit was humming with life. Cars passing by, neighbors talking over fences, children playing in yards. Inside my 4 walls, I might as well have been dead. My phone buzzed. A notification from Facebook. Someone had tagged Katerina in photos from her graduation party, a party I didn't even know was happening. My finger hesitated over the screen before I tapped it open. There she was, radiant in her cap and gown, surrounded by what looked like 50 people at some upscale restaurant downtown. Her mother Elena, who'd left us when Katerina was 12, stood right beside her with arms wrapped around our daughter, like she'd been there every single day of the struggle. My throat constricted. Elena, who'd chosen her career over our family, who'd moved to California, and sent exactly 4 birthday cards in 13 years, was now the mother of the hour. Her new husband, some tech executive with perfectly white teeth, had his hand on Katerina's shoulder like he'd earned the right. I scrolled through the photos, each one a knife twist. Katerina's advisor, Dr. Morrison, the same man who'd called me last year asking if I could help with her final semester expenses. Her college friends, who'd eaten countless dinners at my kitchen table when they couldn't afford meal plans. Her boyfriend Marcus, who'd borrowed my truck so many times I'd started leaving the keys out for him. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I set the phone down and walked to the mantelpiece where I kept the only photo of Katerina and me from her graduation day, a hurried selfie I'd taken after the ceremony before she disappeared into the crowd. In it, she's already looking away, already moving towards someone more important. Her smile is polite but distant, the kind you give to acquaintances, not to the man who raised you alone for 13 years. The house felt like a mausoleum of memories. Every corner held evidence of the sacrifices I'd made, the life I'd built around her dreams. The dining table where I'd helped her with homework until midnight, night after night. The couch where she'd fallen asleep during SAT prep sessions while I quizzed her on vocabulary. The kitchen where I'd made her favorite pancakes every Sunday, even when we could barely afford the groceries. I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank statements, though I knew the numbers by heart. The second mortgage I'd taken out for her undergraduate degree, $47,000. The personal loan for her graduate school, $23,000. The credit card debt accumulated from her emergencies, car repairs, conference fees, interview outfits, security deposits, $8,400. Nearly $80,000. More money than I'd ever had at one time in my entire life, borrowed against the only asset I owned, this house my father had left me. But it wasn't just the money. It was the years, the decades, the choices. I thought about Sandra, the woman from the hardware store who'd asked me to coffee 3 years ago. I declined because Katerina was struggling with her thesis, and needed me to be available. Sandra had smiled and said maybe another time, but another time never came. She'd started dating someone else within the month. I thought about the promotion at the factory that required weekend travel. I'd turned it down because Katerina was going through her mother's remarriage and needed emotional support. My supervisor had shrugged and given it to someone else, someone without family obligations. I thought about my brother's invitation to move to Colorado, to help him start his construction business, to have a fresh start. I'd laughed and said I couldn't leave Detroit, couldn't leave Katerina. He'd stopped asking after the third no. Every major decision in my adult life had been filtered through one question: what does Katerina need? What would be best for Katerina? How can I support Katerina? And now she was Dr. Katerina Bozic, accomplished and educated and successful, celebrating with everyone who mattered to her. Everyone except the man who had made it all possible. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text message from her. "Dad, forgot my diploma at your place. Can you mail it to my apartment? Thanks." "No." "How are you feeling after today?" "No." "Sorry you missed the party." No acknowledgement that today was supposed to be our celebration too. Just a request to mail her diploma like I was some kind of service provider. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to call her, to ask why I hadn't been invited to the party, to tell her how proud I was, to remind her of everything we'd been through together. Part of me wanted to demand an explanation, to let 20 years of suppressed hurt spill out in angry words. Instead, I typed back, "Of course. Congratulations again." But I didn't hit send. I walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, staring at its mostly empty shelves. A half-gallon of milk, some leftover Chinese takeout, a few cans of beer. This was the refrigerator of a man who'd spent so long living for someone else that he'd forgotten how to live for himself. When Katerina lived here, it was always full. Fresh vegetables for her vegetarian phase, organic everything for her health-conscious period, energy drinks for her late-night study sessions. Now it was just the basics, just enough to keep one person alive. I closed the refrigerator and caught my reflection in its stainless steel surface. When had I gotten so old? When had my hair turned completely gray? When had these lines carved themselves so deep around my eyes? I looked like my father in his final years, tired, forgotten, worn down by life's disappointments. The worst part wasn't the money I'd never get back, or the opportunities I'd missed, or even the loneliness that seemed to grow larger every day. The worst part was the slow realization that maybe, somehow, I'd made myself invisible. Maybe by always putting her first, by never asking for anything in return, by making my love so unconditional and available, I'd taught her that I didn't matter. Maybe I'd trained my own daughter to see me as a given, as reliable as the sunrise, as present as air, as forgettable as yesterday's weather. Outside, a car door slammed. Through my front window, I watched the neighbors across the street, the Johnsons, help their college-age son carry boxes into their house. He was home for the summer, and they were all laughing about something, working together, a family united in some small, ordinary moment. I envied them that ordinary moment. I envied them their certainty that they mattered to their child. My phone sat silent on the counter, my unsent message still waiting. I picked it up and deleted the text, then turned it off completely. For the first time in 23 years, I didn't want to be available for whatever Katerina might need. The diploma lay where it had fallen, face down on the floor. Dr. Katerina Bozic. A name that represented thousands of hours of my labor, countless sacrifices, endless faith in someone who had apparently learned to see right through me. I left it there and walked upstairs to my bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out what a 65-year-old man does when he discovers that the person he built his entire life around doesn't see him as worth a place at her celebration. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out how to matter again. But tonight, I just wanted to disappear into the darkness and pretend that invisible and gone were the same thing. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I found myself in the basement at 3 a.m., surrounded by boxes I hadn't opened in years. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across 23 years of fatherhood stored in cardboard containers labeled in my careful handwriting. Katerina's school papers, baby clothes, report cards, art projects. If you're finding this story as compelling as I am living it, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything, and there are more stories like this one coming. Each box was a time capsule of devotion. I pulled down the one marked 1st grade through 5th and opened it with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion and emotion. Inside, construction paper turkeys with traced handprints, spelling tests with gold stars, a Mother's Day card she'd made for me because, "Daddy, you're my mommy too." That card. I held it up to the light, remembering the day she'd brought it home. She was 7, gap-toothed and proud, explaining that Mrs. Patterson had said all the kids should make cards for their mothers, but she wanted to make mine for me instead. "Because you do all the mommy things too," she'd said, climbing into my lap. "You braid my hair and pack my lunches and come to all my school plays." I'd cried that day, quietly, after she'd gone to bed. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being everything to someone so small and precious. The memory led to another, then another, cascading through my mind like dominoes falling. I opened the next box, middle school. Here were the debate club ribbons I'd driven 4 hours to watch her earn. The science fair projects we'd worked on until our eyes burned from strain. The permission slips I'd signed for field trips I couldn't afford to chaperone because I was working double shifts to pay for her violin lessons. In the corner of this box, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was the dress she'd worn to her 8th grade graduation. Navy blue with tiny white flowers. I'd bought it at Macy's, full price, not on sale, because she'd fallen in love with it, and I couldn't bear to see disappointment in her eyes. It had cost me a week's worth of grocery money, but watching her face light up when she tried it on was worth every ramen noodle dinner that followed. "Do I look pretty, Daddy?" she'd asked, spitting in front of my bedroom mirror. "You look like a princess," I'd answered, and meant it with every fiber of my being. That night, she'd given a speech as class valedictorian. I'd sat in the front row, wearing my only good shirt, bursting with pride as she talked about dedication and perseverance and following your dreams. She'd looked right at me when she said, "I want to thank my father, who taught me that anything is possible if you work hard enough." The entire auditorium had turned to look at me, and for those few seconds, I'd felt like the most important person in the world. Now, 15 years later, I wondered if she even remembered that speech. I moved to the next box, high school years. Here were the acceptance letters from colleges we couldn't afford, the rejection letters from scholarships she didn't quite earn, the financial aid forms I'd filled out with increasing desperation. This box held the documentation of my first real financial sacrifices, the equity loan on the house, the canceled vacation to Florida that I'd been planning for 3 years, the sale of my motorcycle that had been my one personal indulgence. At the bottom of the box was a stack of her college applications, essays I'd helped her revise a dozen times each. Her personal statement for the University of Michigan had been about overcoming adversity, about being raised by a single parent who'd worked multiple jobs to provide for her. She'd written about learning responsibility from watching me balance work and fatherhood, about understanding the value of hard work by seeing me leave for my second job each evening. My father is my hero, the essay had concluded. He sacrificed everything to give me opportunities he never had, and I hope someday to make him proud. She'd gotten into Michigan. Full ride. We'd celebrated with pizza and root beer floats, and I'd never been happier in my life. But somewhere along the way, hero had become invisible. Sacrifice had become expected. Pride had become assumption. I climbed the basement stairs with my arms full of memory boxes, carrying them to the living room, where Katerina's diploma still lay on the floor. I arranged the boxes in a circle around the certificate, like evidence in a trial where I was both prosecutor and defendant. The boxes told the story of a man who'd structured his entire existence around one person's dreams. They held proof of soccer tournaments in Cleveland, debate competitions in Columbus, science camps in Ann Arbor, every weekend for years spent in my car, driving Katerina to activities that would build her college resume, while my own life grew smaller and more circumscribed. I opened the box labeled College Years and found the contracts I'd signed, putting my house up as collateral for her student loans. The promissory notes in my handwriting, borrowed from my brother, from my coworkers, from anyone willing to help fund her education. The receipt for the laptop I bought her freshman year, $1, $200 when I was bringing home barely $2,000 a month. And the letters. God, the letters. Dear Dad, thank you so much for the money. I know it's not easy, and I promise I'm working hard. The professors here are amazing, and I'm learning so much. I'll make you proud, I promise. Love, Katerina. Daddy, I'm sorry to ask again, but the internship in Washington doesn't pay anything, and I need money for rent and food. I know you're doing everything you can. I love you more than words can say. Dad, I got the research position. Dr. Morrison says I'm one of the most promising graduate students he's ever worked with. Thank you for believing in me when no one else would. You're the best father in the world. When had those letters stopped coming? When had gratitude become assumption, love become obligation? When had "You're the best father in the world" become "Can you mail my diploma?" I picked up my phone and scrolled through our text messages from the past year. The pattern was clear, brutal in its consistency. Dad, can you help with my rent this month? Need money for car insurance. Emergency at the apartment, pipe burst, need $800 for repairs. Car broke down. Can you transfer money for a rental? And my responses, always the same. Of course, honey. Anything you need. When was the last time she'd asked how I was doing? When was the last time she'd called just to talk, just to connect, just to hear my voice? I scrolled back months, then years, searching for any message that wasn't a request for help or a perfunctory response to my check-ins. I couldn't find one. The truth settled into my chest like a physical weight. I had become a financial resource to her, nothing more. The person she called when she needed money, needed help, needed something solved. But not the person she celebrated with, not the person she turned to for joy, not the person who deserved a place at the table of her success. I walked to the kitchen and made coffee, though it was nearly 4 a.m. Through the window, I could see the first hints of dawn creeping across the Detroit skyline. Somewhere out there, Katerina was probably sleeping peacefully in her apartment, the apartment whose security deposit I paid, whose first 6 months of rent I'd covered until she found work. I wondered if she'd given me a single thought since sending that text about mailing the diploma. I wondered if it had occurred to her that yesterday was supposed to be my celebration too, my validation that all the sacrifice had been worth it. Probably not. The coffee maker gurgled to life, and I stood there in my empty kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a life lived entirely in service to someone else's dreams, trying to figure out when being a devoted father had turned me into a ghost in my own child's story. The boxes in the living room held proof of love, of sacrifice, of unwavering commitment. But they also held proof of something else. Proof that I'd taught my daughter that my needs didn't matter, that my life was secondary to hers, that I existed to serve rather than to be seen. Outside, Detroit was waking up to a new day. Inside, I was waking up to a new understanding of how invisible love can become when it's never asked to prove its worth. The diploma was still on the floor when I returned to the living room with my coffee. Dr. Katerina Bozic. The culmination of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd sacrificed for, everything I believed in. And she wanted me to mail it to her. Like I was nothing more than a postal service for her convenience. Maybe that's all I'd ever been. 3 days passed before Katerina called. 3 days of me staring at her diploma on my coffee table. 3 days of rehearsing conversations in my head. 3 days of waiting for some acknowledgement that I existed beyond my utility as a mailing service. When my phone finally rang Thursday evening, I almost didn't answer. I was in the garage, organizing tools I rarely used anymore, trying to stay busy enough to avoid the growing hollowness in my chest. But decades of conditioned response made me drop everything and reach for the phone when I saw her name. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice carrying that slightly impatient tone I'd grown accustomed to over the past few years. "Did you get a chance to mail my diploma yet?" "Not." "How are you?" "Not." "I've been thinking about you." "Just straight to business." "No," I said, surprising myself with the word. "I haven't had time." A pause. In the old days, she would have apologized for bothering me, would have asked about my schedule, would have shown some consideration for my time. Now, I could practically hear her checking her watch through the phone. "Well, I really need it soon. I have to submit it for my job application by Monday. Can you overnight it?" "Overnight shipping costs $35, I said quietly. "Oh." Another pause. "Well, could you cover it? I'm really tight on money right now, with the move to San Francisco and everything." San Francisco. She was moving to San Francisco, and I was hearing about it for the first time during a phone call about mailing her diploma. "You're moving to San Francisco?" I asked, setting down the wrench I'd been holding. "Yeah, didn't I tell you? I got that position with the environmental consulting firm. It's amazing. They're starting me at $95,000 a year plus benefits. The office is right downtown, and I found this cute apartment in the Mission District." She was excited, animated in a way I hadn't heard in months. But the excitement wasn't for sharing good news with her father. It was the self-absorbed excitement of someone describing their life to an acquaintance. "When do you move?" I asked. "Next week." "That's why I need the diploma so urgently." Next week. She was leaving Michigan, leaving me, in a matter of days, and this phone call about mailing her certificate was apparently going to be our goodbye. "Congratulations," I said, though the word felt like sawdust in my mouth. "That's wonderful news." "Thanks. So about the overnight shipping?" "I'll take care of it," I said, because that's what I always said. "I'll send it tomorrow." "Great. Oh, and Dad? The apartment requires first and last month's rent up front, and with the moving expenses, I'm completely tapped out. Could you help me with the deposit? It's only $3,000. Only $3,000. 3 months of my mortgage payments. 6 weeks of groceries. The remainder of my savings account. "Katerina," I said slowly, "I need to ask you something." "Sure, what?" I took a deep breath, gathering courage I wasn't sure I possessed. "Do you remember the last time you called me just to talk? Not to ask for money or help with something, but just to see how I was doing?" Silence stretched between us. I could hear traffic in the background. She was walking somewhere, probably to meet friends, probably in a hurry to get off the phone with her inconvenient father. "Dad, what kind of question is that?" Of course I care how you're doing. But when was the last time you asked? What's this about? Are you okay? You sound weird. Even now, her concern felt performative, obligatory. Like she was checking a box marked express appropriate worry about father. I'm fine, I lied. Just tired, I guess. Well, you should get some rest. So about the $3,000. I don't have $3,000, Katerina. The words hung in the air like a confession. I'd never said no to her before. Never admitted limitation. Never allowed my own financial reality to interfere with her needs. What do you mean you don't have it? You own the house, you have your job. I mortgaged the house for your education. Twice. I have $800 in my checking account and about $2,000 in savings. That's it. More silence. When she spoke again, her voice had gone cold. Are you seriously telling me you can't help me right now? When I'm finally getting my career started? I'm telling you I've helped you for 23 years, and I'm financially exhausted. Financially exhausted. She repeated the phrase like it was foreign language. Dad, I never asked you to sacrifice everything. You chose to do that. The words hit me like a physical blow. All those years of working double shifts, of selling everything I owned, of turning down opportunities, and she saw it as my choice, my problem, my fault. You're right, I said quietly. I did choose to do that. Because I loved you. And I appreciate it, I really do. But I'm not responsible for your financial decisions. No, I agreed. You're not responsible for my decisions. But you are responsible for yours. And you've chosen to see me as nothing more than a bank account for the past 5 years. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you visited me? When was the last time you called on my birthday? When was the last time you asked about my job, my health, my life? I could hear her breathing, but she didn't answer. Your graduation was supposed to be our celebration, I continued, my voice gaining strength. We were supposed to be proud together of what we accomplished. Instead, I got to watch you celebrate with everyone else while I sat alone in that auditorium, and then I found out about your party on Facebook. Dad, I raised you alone for 13 years. I put you through college and graduate school. I've given you everything I had, and more than I had. And at your graduation, you forgot I existed. That's not true. Then why wasn't I invited to your party? Silence. Why didn't you introduce me to Dr. Morrison, who I've been sending money to for 2 years? Why didn't you ask me to meet your friends, who ate dinner at my table dozens of times? Why did I have to learn about your move to San Francisco during a phone call about mailing your diploma? You're being dramatic. Dramatic? 23 years of devotion, and I was being dramatic for wanting to be acknowledged. Maybe I am, I said. Maybe wanting your daughter to see you as more than a financial resource is dramatic. I don't see you as just a financial resource. Don't you? Tell me about my life, Katerina. Tell me what I do for fun, who my friends are, what I worry about, what I dream about. Tell me anything about me that doesn't involve money. The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. I have to go, she finally said. I'm meeting Marcus for dinner. Of course you are. Will you send the diploma? Even now, even after everything I just said, her priority was getting what she needed from me. Yes, I said, because I was apparently incapable of letting her down, even when she had no problem letting me down. I'll send it. Thanks. And Dad? Maybe we can talk more when things calm down after my move. Maybe. When things calm down. When it's convenient for her. When she needs something else. Maybe, I echoed. She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in my garage for a long time after that, surrounded by tools and memories, and the growing understanding that I had spent decades creating a relationship where my love was constant and her consideration was optional. The next morning, I drove to the post office with her diploma. $35 for overnight shipping. $35 I couldn't really afford, for a daughter who couldn't be bothered to thank me for it. The postal clerk was a woman about my age, with kind eyes and careful hands. She weighed the package and asked if I wanted insurance. "What happens if it gets lost?" I asked. "We'll replace it, up to the insured value." I almost laughed. Some things can't be replaced once they're lost. Some things, like the respect of your child, like feeling valued in your own family, like mattering to the person you love most, don't come with insurance policies. "No insurance," I said. As I drove home, I realized something had shifted during that phone call. For the first time in 23 years, I'd told Katerina the truth about how her behavior made me feel. I'd spoken up for myself, defended my worth, demanded to be seen. And she dismissed it all as me being dramatic. But I wasn't done being dramatic. I was done being invisible. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Katerina had moved to San Francisco. I was getting ready for work, drinking coffee from the mug she'd given me for Father's Day 5 years ago, the last Father's Day gift I could remember receiving from her, when my phone rang. It wasn't Katerina. It was Marcus. "Mr. Bozic?" His voice sounded strained, uncertain. "This is Marcus, Katerina's, well, her ex-boyfriend now, I guess." Ex-boyfriend. Another major life change I was learning about secondhand. "What can I do for you, Marcus?" I asked, though part of me already knew this conversation wasn't going to be pleasant. "I need to tell you something. About Katerina. About a lot of things. Can I come over?" An hour later, Marcus sat across from me at my kitchen table, looking like a man who'd been carrying a heavy burden for too long. He was 28, a good kid who'd always been respectful to me, always grateful for the meals I cooked when he and Katerina were dating. He'd borrowed my truck, sure, but he'd always returned it with a full tank of gas and a sincere thank you. "I don't know how to start this," he said, staring into the coffee mug I'd set in front of him. "Start with the truth," I said. "That's usually the best place." He looked up at me then, and I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tighten. Pity. This young man was looking at me with pity, and I had a terrible suspicion I was about to understand why. "She's been lying to you," he said quietly. "4 years. About a lot of things." I set down my coffee mug carefully, the way you do when you're trying to maintain control. "What kind of things?" "The money, for starters." "All that money you've been sending her for emergencies?" "There were no emergencies." "The pipe that supposedly burst in her apartment?" "Never happened." "The car repairs?" "She sold that car 2 years ago and bought a newer one with cash." "The conference fees, the interview outfits, the security deposits, all lies." The kitchen seemed to tilt slightly. "That's impossible." "She sent me photos of the damage, receipts for the repairs." "Photoshop," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's good with computers. She'd find pictures online, doctor them to look like they were from her apartment, her car. She even created fake receipt templates." My mind reeled, trying to process what he was telling me. "But why?" "She was getting her PhD. She had expenses. She got a full fellowship her second year. Full tuition, plus a stipend for living expenses. She's been making money from school, not losing it." The room went completely silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. The clock Katerina had helped me hang when she was 16, standing on a chair while I held it steady. "Where did the money go?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Shopping. Expensive restaurants. Weekend trips to Chicago and New York. Designer clothes, expensive skincare, A new MacBook every year even though the old one worked fine. She liked having nice things. She liked impressing people. She was spending my money to impress people. Your money and... Marcus hesitated, looking like he was about to deliver an even worse blow. Mr. Bozak, you weren't the only one sending her money. I stared at him. What do you mean? Her mother. Elena. She's been sending money too. Has been for the past 3 years, ever since she found out about Katerina's PhD program. Guild money, Katerina called it. Elena. The woman who'd abandoned us, who'd sent 4 birthday cards in 13 years, had been secretly funding our daughter's lifestyle while I'd been mortgaging my house. How much? I asked. About the same as you, from what Katerina told me. Maybe more. I did quick math in my head. If Elena had been sending as much as I had, Katerina had been receiving potentially $160,000 over the past few years. More money than I'd made in some entire years. And she'd spent it on luxuries, while letting me believe she was struggling. There's more, Marcus said, and his voice was so gentle I knew whatever came next was going to destroy me. Tell me. The graduation party. She knew you wanted to be there. She planned it specifically to exclude you. That's not possible. She told me she was afraid you'd embarrass her in front of her professional contacts. She said you were too blue-collar, too simple for the crowd she was trying to impress. She said having her factory worker father there would hurt her image. The words hit me like physical blows. Too blue-collar. Too simple. Factory worker father. Every sacrifice I'd made to give her opportunities, and she was ashamed of me. She invited her mother instead, Marcus continued. Elena and her new husband. She thought they looked more appropriate. I thought about those Facebook photos, Elena with her arms around Katerina, both of them beaming. Elena, who'd contributed nothing to raising this child, being rewarded with a place of honor while I sat alone in my empty house. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Because I broke up with her over it. Over how she treats you, how she talks about you. And because she's asking you for money for her apartment deposit, but she already paid it. With cash. She's planning to pocket whatever you send. The $3,000. She was going to steal $3,000 from me, while I was already financially ruined from supporting her lies. How long have you known? I asked. About the money? About 6 months. About her attitude toward you? Longer. I kept hoping she'd change, that she'd realize what she was doing. But after graduation, after she planned that party specifically to keep you away, I couldn't pretend anymore. I stood up from the table, walking to the window that looked out over my backyard. The grass needed cutting. The fence needed painting. These were things I could fix, problems with solutions. Unlike the relationship with my daughter, which I was beginning to understand might be broken beyond repair. She doesn't love me, I said, and hearing the words out loud made them real in a way they hadn't been when they were just fears in my head. I think she does, Marcus said carefully. But she loves what you provide more than who you are. And she's never had to choose between the two. I turned back to face him. What do you mean? You've never said no. You've never made her consider your feelings, your limitations, your humanity. She sees you as a function rather than a person. The function that provides money and support and unconditional love without requiring anything in return. So this is my fault. No, Marcus said firmly. Her choices are her responsibility. But maybe it's time to let her make different choices. After Marcus left, I sat in my kitchen for hours, staring at the phone. 3 weeks ago, I thought my daughter was struggling financially while pursuing her dreams. Now I knew she'd been living a life funded by my sacrifice, while being ashamed of my existence. 3 weeks ago, I thought she forgot to invite me to her graduation party. Now I knew she deliberately excluded me because I didn't fit her image. 3 weeks ago, I thought she saw me as a financial resource. Now I knew she saw me as a mark in a con game that had been running for years. The worst part wasn't the money. The worst part wasn't even the lies. The worst part was the gradual understanding that the daughter I devoted my life to had become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could look at my sacrifices and feel not gratitude, but embarrassment. My phone buzzed. A text from Katerina. "Dad, any chance you can send the deposit money today? The landlord is getting impatient." I stared at the message for a long time. $3,000 she didn't need, from a man she was ashamed to call father, sent by a person she saw as too simple to share her success with. For the first time in 23 years, I typed a single word in response. "No." Then I turned off my phone and sat in the growing darkness of my kitchen, finally understanding the difference between loving someone and enabling them, between supporting someone and letting them consume you, between being a devoted father and being a convenient fool. The question now was what I was going to do about it. What would you do in his place? The phone call started within hours of my single-word response. First 1 call, then 3, then 7 missed calls by midnight. Each voicemail more frantic than the last. "Dad, what do you mean no? I really need this money. Call me back. Dad, seriously, I don't understand what's happening. The landlord is threatening to give the apartment to someone else. Please call me. Dad, this isn't funny anymore. I know you're upset about something, but I can't read your mind. Just tell me what's wrong and we'll figure it out." By the third day, the tone changed completely. "Fine. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I figured it out on my own. I always do. I guess I know where I stand now." I listened to each message once, then deleted them. For 23 years, every crisis in Katerina's life had become an emergency in mine. Every problem she had became something I had to solve. Every disappointment she felt became something I had to fix. But not anymore. On Friday, exactly 1 week after Marcus's revelation, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I took a day off work for myself. Not for a parent-teacher conference, not to drive Katerina somewhere, not to handle some crisis in her life. Just for me. I drove to the bank first. "I'd like to see my mortgage documents," I told the loan officer, a young woman named Jennifer who'd handled my account for the past 3 years. She pulled up my file on her computer, and I watched her face change as she read through the details. The original mortgage on my father's house had been $89,000. Over the years, with the home equity loan and the refinancing to help pay for Katerina's education, I now owed $127,000 on a house worth maybe $95,000. "Mr. Bozick," Jennifer said carefully, "your loan-to-value ratio is quite high. If you were considering selling, I'd lose money." "Yes, sir." "Probably around $30,000 after fees and commissions." $30,000. That's what my generosity had cost me. Not just the money I had sent to Katerina, but the equity in the only asset I owned. "What if I wanted to see a financial counselor?" I asked. Jennifer's expression softened. "I can set that up for you. We have several excellent counselors who specialize in debt management and retirement planning." Retirement planning. At 65, with no savings and an underwater mortgage, my retirement plan had essentially become work until I die. The financial counselor's name was David Chen, and he was brutally honest in a way that was somehow comforting. He spread my documents across his desk like a medical examiner laying out evidence. "How long have you been supporting your daughter financially?" he asked. "Since she was born, I guess. But the heavy support for the past 6 years." And in that time, how much have you contributed to your own retirement? I stared at him. I haven't. Any savings account separate from what you've been spending on her education and expenses? No. Life insurance? Just a small policy through work. David leaned back in his chair. Mr. Bozick, I need you to understand something. If you continue on your current path, you will never be able to retire. You'll work until you're physically unable, and then you'll depend on Social Security, which will not be enough to cover your mortgage payments. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. What would you recommend? Complete financial separation from your daughter immediately. No more loans, no more gifts, no more emergencies. Start contributing to a retirement account, even if it's just $50 a month. Consider selling the house and downsizing to eliminate your debt. Sell my father's house. It's not your father's house anymore, Mr. Bozick. It's the bank's house. You just live in it and pay the mortgage. I left the bank with a manila folder full of hard truths and drove to the one place I'd always found peace, the Detroit River. I'd parked at the marina and walked out onto the pier, watching the water flow past, carrying away whatever it touched. My phone rang. Katerina again. This time I answered. Dad, finally. Look, I don't know why you're being so stubborn about this money, but I figured out another solution. I can take out a personal loan, but I need you to co-sign it. It's just $5,000, and I'll pay it back myself. $5,000. More debt in my name, for a woman who'd been lying to me for years, who was ashamed to have me at her graduation, who saw me as too simple for her new life. No, I said. Dad, Katerina, I know about the lies. Silence. Then, what lies? The emergencies that weren't emergencies. The money from your mother. The graduation party you planned to exclude me from because I was too blue-collar for your image. More silence. When she spoke again, her voice had changed completely, colder, more calculating. Marcus told you. Marcus told me the truth. Something you haven't done in years. Dad, you don't understand. The money from Mom, that was separate. And the party thing, that wasn't about being ashamed of you. It was about... Stop. The word came out harder than I'd intended. Just stop lying. You've been lying for so long you don't even know how to tell the truth anymore. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? I mortgaged my house for fake emergencies. I turned down relationships, promotions, opportunities to live my own life because I thought you needed me. I sat alone at your graduation while you celebrated with everyone else because you were embarrassed by the man who made your education possible. I never asked you to sacrifice everything for me. There it was again. The same defense she'd used before. The same denial of responsibility for how she treated my love. You're right, I said. You never asked. You just expected. And I gave, and gave, and gave, until I forgot that I was supposed to matter too. Of course you matter. Do I? Then why did you lie to me for years? Why did you steal money from me? Why was I the last person to know about your move, your job, your breakup with Marcus? She didn't answer. I'll tell you why, I continued. Because in your mind, I'm not a person. I'm a service. I'm the dad function in your life. The thing that provides money and support without requiring respect or honesty or consideration in return. That's not true. Prove it. What? Prove it's not true. Tell me something about my life that doesn't involve how I can help you. Tell me about my hopes, my fears, my dreams. Tell me what I do for fun, who my friends are, what makes me happy. Tell me you see me as a human being instead of a resource. The silence stretched on and on. You can't, can you? I said quietly. Because you've never bothered to see me as anything more than what I could provide. Dad, I'm done, Katerina. I'm done being your emergency contact, your backup plan, your source of free money. I'm done being invisible in your life except when you need something. You can't just cut me off. Watch me. Dad, I'm your daughter. Yes, you are. But I'm your father, not your bank account. And it's time you learn the difference. I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. The sun was setting over the Detroit River, painting the water gold and orange. For the first time in years, I sat in complete silence. No phone calls to answer, no crisis to solve, no emergency to fund. Just me and the water, and the growing realization that I had spent so long being what everyone else needed that I'd forgotten who I was. But I was starting to remember. A woman walking her dog stopped near the bench where I was sitting. "Beautiful evening," she said. "Yes," I replied. "It really is." She smiled and continued on her walk, and I realized it was the first genuine conversation I'd had with someone in months that wasn't about Katerina, wasn't about money, wasn't about solving someone else's problems. It was just two people acknowledging a beautiful evening. I sat there until the stars came out, thinking about David Chin's advice, about Marcus's revelations, about the choice I'd just made. For the first time in 23 years, I didn't know what crisis would come next in Katerina's life. And for the first time in 23 years, that felt like freedom. Tomorrow, I would start the process of selling the house. Tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding a life that had room for my own dreams. Tomorrow, I would start learning how to matter to myself again. But tonight, I just sat by the river and remembered what peace felt like. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my new apartment, making coffee for one and actually enjoying the simplicity of it. The apartment was small, a one-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from my old house. But it was mine. Really mine, not mortgaged to the breaking point, not weighed down by the ghosts of sacrifices that had gone unappreciated. The sale of my father's house had been exactly as painful as David Chin had predicted. After paying off the mortgage, the realtor's fees, and the various closing costs, I'd walked away with about $3,000. $3,000 from a house my father had owned outright, that I'd leveraged into oblivion for someone who saw me as an embarrassment. But those $3,000 represented something I hadn't had in years, money that was mine, earned through my choices, free from the weight of someone else's needs and lies. My phone sat silent on the counter. I'd changed my number 3 months ago, after Katerina had somehow convinced Elena to start calling me on her behalf. The conversations with Elena had been surreal. This woman who'd abandoned our family 13 years ago, lecturing me about my responsibilities as a father, demanding I support our daughter through this difficult transition. I'd listened to exactly one of those lectures before hanging up and blocking her number too. The doorbell rang, interrupting my morning routine. I opened it to find Sandra from the hardware store, holding a casserole dish and wearing a smile that reached her eyes. "I brought that recipe I was telling you about," she said. "The one with the chicken and the rice that's impossible to mess up." Sandra, the woman I'd turned down for coffee 3 years ago because Katerina needed me to be available. The woman who'd somehow found the grace to give me a second chance when I'd finally worked up the courage to ask. "You didn't have to do that," I said, but I was smiling as I took the dish from her hands. "I wanted to. Besides, I know you're still learning your way around that kitchen." She was right. For 23 years, I'd cooked for two, planned meals around someone else's preferences, kept the refrigerator stocked with foods I didn't particularly like because they were Katerina's favorites. Learning to cook for myself, to buy only what I wanted, to eat when I was hungry instead of when someone else needed feeding, it had been harder than I'd expected, but also liberating. "Coffee?" I asked. I'd love some. We sat at my small kitchen table, a table that seated two comfortably instead of the massive dining room set I'd owned before, the one where I'd spent countless evenings helping with homework that never seemed to end. Sandra told me about her day at the hardware store, about the customer who tried to return a hammer after using it to demolish half his bathroom, about her daughter's college plans and her son's new job. "How's your daughter doing?" she asked, and I felt that familiar tightness in my chest that Katerina's name still brought. "I don't know," I said honestly. "We don't talk anymore." Sandra nodded, her expression carefully neutral. I told her some of the story, not all of it, not the depths of the financial manipulation and emotional abuse, but enough that she understood why I'd made the choice to step away. "That must be hard," she said. "It is, but not as hard as I thought it would be." And that was true. The first month had been terrible, a constant sense of phantom limb syndrome, reaching for my phone to check on her, starting to dial her number during every small moment of good news or concern. But gradually, the silence had become less painful and more peaceful. "I keep waiting to regret it," I admitted. "Everyone says you can't just cut off your own child. But I don't regret it. I regret how long it took me to realize I needed to." Sandra reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is stop enabling their worst behavior." After Sandra left, I drove to my new job at the community college. 3 months ago, when I'd realized I couldn't afford to retire and needed to find better work than the factory, I discovered that my years of helping Katerina with her studies had given me something I'd never recognized. I was a good teacher. The job was part-time, helping adult learners in the GED program, but it paid better than the factory and gave me something I'd never had before, work that felt meaningful beyond the paycheck it provided. "Mr. B," called Maria, one of my students, as I walked into the classroom. "I got my math test back. B+. Maria was 42, a single mother of 3 who dropped out of high school to take care of her sick mother. She'd been working toward her GED for 2 years, struggling especially with math, convinced she was too stupid to learn. "I told you that you were smarter than you thought," I said, genuinely proud of her progress. "You never gave up on me," she said, "even when I wanted to give up on myself." As my students filed in for the afternoon session, I thought about the irony. For 23 years, I'd poured my energy into educating someone who'd grown to see me as beneath her intellectual notice. Now I spent my days working with people who appreciated every moment of help, who saw education as a gift rather than an entitlement, who understood that support was something to be grateful for rather than something to be expected. The work was rewarding in ways that surprised me daily. After class, I stopped by the grocery store, something that had become a small pleasure since living alone. I could walk through the aisles without mentally calculating what Katerina might want, without buying organic everything to satisfy dietary restrictions that changed with her moods. I bought what I wanted: regular milk, store-brand cereal, the slightly dented cans that were 50 cents cheaper. At the checkout, the young cashier, maybe 20 years old, was struggling with an elderly customer's complicated coupon situation. The customer was getting frustrated, the line was backing up, and the cashier looked close to tears. "Take your time," I told her when my turn came. "Everyone has complicated days." She looked up at me with such gratitude that I realized how easy it was to be kind when you weren't emotionally depleted, how much easier it was to see other people's struggles when you weren't drowning in someone else's manufactured crisis. That evening, I did something I had started doing every week. I called my brother in Colorado. "Say Japan." His voice was warm, welcoming, unchanged despite the years of declined invitations. "How's the new place?" "Good," I said. "Really good. How's the construction business?" We talked for an hour about his work, his wife's garden, his kids' activities. Normal family conversation between brothers who were interested in each other's lives. "You know," he said near the end of the call, "the offer still stands. If you ever want to make a fresh start out here, I could use a partner. Someone I trust." A year ago, I would have automatically said no. Katerina needed me in Michigan. Katerina's life was in Detroit. I couldn't abandon Katerina. "Let me think about it," I said, and meant it. After hanging up, I made a list of the things I'd discovered about myself in the past 6 months. I liked teaching. I was good at it, and it gave me purpose beyond providing for someone else. I enjoyed quiet evenings without the constant possibility of crisis phone calls. I could cook for myself and actually enjoyed the simplicity of pleasing only my own tastes. I had more money now, even with lower income, because I wasn't funding someone else's lives. I slept better without the weight of other people's problems on my shoulders. I was starting to remember who I'd been before I became defined entirely by fatherhood. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I found myself looking at the one photo I'd kept of Katerina, not from her graduation, but from when she was 8 years old, gap-toothed and genuine, hugging me after a little league game where she'd struck out 3 times but still smiled because I'd brought orange slices for the whole team. I missed that little girl. I grieved for her, for the relationship we might have had if I'd been wiser, if I'd taught her to value people rather than just their utility, if I'd shown her that love required reciprocity to survive. But I didn't miss the woman she'd become. I didn't miss the lies, the manipulation, the constant crisis that always required my money but never my presence. I didn't miss feeling invisible in the life of someone I'd sacrificed everything for. My phone, my new, private phone that only people who respected me had the number to, sat silent and peaceful on my nightstand. No emergency calls. No manufactured crisis. No one needed me to solve their problems, fund their mistakes, or absorb their lack of consideration. Tomorrow, I would teach adults who appreciated education. I would have lunch with Sandra, who saw me as a person worth knowing rather than a resource worth using. I would continue building a life that had room for my own dreams, my own needs, my own dignity. And maybe, just maybe, I would call my brother back and tell him I was ready for a fresh start in Colorado. At 65 years old, I was finally learning how to live for myself. It had taken the loss of everything I thought mattered to discover what actually did. The silence in my apartment wasn't the silence of abandonment anymore. It was the silence of peace. And for the first time in decades, that was enough. Thank you for following this journey with us. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about finding dignity, rebuilding after betrayal, and discovering that it's never too late to reclaim your life. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light.